Welcome back, warriors. So yesterday we got to go with the family to the Leighton Temple open house. And although it took like literally all day, it was awesome. And just like the peace, the love that just comes from being in the temple, like it just confirmed to me that families are forever and that our efforts here are worth it. And something else that also was confirmed to me was that I'm going to love serving in the temple starting June 7th. It's going to be amazing. So anyways, really excited about that. I also love the shift that I have because then like it doesn't feel like it's intruding on the rest of my day. Or taking up the rest of my day. Like I feel like I could come back and take a nap if I wanted. But anyways, like I feel like it's going to be great. And what's awesome is the fact that my working out does not, my workouts don't happen on Fridays because they don't have any classes at the time that I like on Fridays. So I'm like, great, then works out. Okay. So here we are, chapter 21 in Mosiah, and here is the chapter summary. It says, Limhi's people are smitten and defeated by the Lamanites. They meet Ammon and are converted. They tell Ammon of the 24 Jaredite plates. Okay, so we have, how many verses are in this one? We have 27, just kidding. We have 36 verses in Mosiah 21, and then we have 16 verses in Mosiah 22. So as you can see, I'm a little bit behind schedule for my reading. So we're going to try and cover some of, maybe at least a couple chapters, but we'll see because 36 verses is a lot of verses. To try and cover quickly. Anyways. So here we go. And it came to pass that Limhi and his people returned to the city of Nephi. We're going to slow this down a little bit so that I don't feel like I'm running. And began to dwell in the land again in peace. And it came to pass that after many days, the Lamanites began again to be stirred up in anger against the Nephites. Okay, wait. Apparently we need to read this little preface here before we keep going. So it says, this chapter reveals what happened to Limhi's people between the time they began to be in bondage, to the Lamanites, and the time that Ammon and the other strong men arrived. Here are some things to review and remember. Ammon and the others did not know that they were on a rescue mission. Mosiah sent them to inquire concerning their brethren or to find out what had happened to the Nephites who had left 60 years earlier. Okay, remember how that was a little bit confusing, but we kind of understand, so we're trying to go with it. And it took them 40 days to find Limhi and his people. In Mosiah 7:16, we learn that Ammon and his brethren suffered many things. They had suffered hunger, thirst, and fatigue. But even though the journey was difficult and they wandered many days in the wilderness, they did not give up until they arrived at the land of Nephi. So this is important to remember because in this chapter we will realize the sad and terrible state Limhi and his people were in. We already read in Mosiah 7 and 8 about the time Ammon arrived and met Limhi and his people, but those chapters do not give us a full understanding of what they were experiencing and why they needed deliverance. Perhaps Mormon knew that we needed the history first, and now in this chapter, he tells us the suffering they were going through. So in this chapter, we will understand why it was so good that Ammon and his brethren did not give up because the journey was too long or too hard, and we will see that ultimately it was the Lord that provided the deliverance of these Nephites and that he is able to deliver, which is why we call the Lord, one of his names is Deliverer, because he does that. He delivers us from bondage. From bondage to the adversary, from bondage to ourselves, from bondage, from all the bondages. Okay, so verse 2, it says, and it came to pass after many days, the Lamanites began again to be stirred up in anger against the Nephites, and they began to come into the borders of the land round about. So imagine like already feeling like you have to do a lot of things because you're being held captive, sort of, right? But then they say they're going to give you like space and stuff so you can feel a little bit like you're safe. But then they come upon the borders of the land. And so now they're like coming in, and you can never feel safe when that happens. Like, and you can't trust them because you're captured. And so it makes sense, I guess, that they're not going to do what they say because you're their prisoners or whatever. But it does feel weird to be like, okay, you can stay here, but you have to give us the taxes, right? And so then like after they say that, you'd be like, oh, okay, so that's what they need us to do. We're not going to actually be attacked by them, right? So you think that, but then you really are, right? It's like Satan. He's always like, well, do this and you'll be awesome, but then there's always like those stipulations that come after, right? And those things that he can't keep promises because he's Satan. Okay, so verse 3, now they durst not slay them because of the oath which their king had made unto Limhi, right? So they're not allowed to kill them, but they would smite them on their cheeks and exercise authority over them, and began to put heavy burdens upon their backs and drive them as they would a dumb ass. Yea, all this was done that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. And so it is really sad that that's how they were being treated, right? But again, like, they chose to leave. They didn't want to stay in the land that they were supposed to be in. They wanted to go back. And this is kind of what happens when you're not obedient, right? There are consequences. Okay, so verses 1-4 recap. The Nephites were in bondage to the Lamanites and had to pay them a heavy tribute. But these verses show that the Lamanites were relentless in their persecution of them. Mormon pointed out that all this was done that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. Abinadi had warned them that their wickedness would lead to this very thing, and now it has. The Lord had blessed them with a prophet, and they killed that prophet. So this is where that course brought them. Okay, so then that consequence comes from having killed a prophet. So there's that too, right? And then verse 5, and now the afflictions of the Nephites were great, and there was no way that they could deliver themselves out of their hands, for the Lamanites had surrounded them on every side. So Mormon's commentary again here, and he points out that there is no way that these Nephites can deliver themselves. In this chapter, we will see that they will try, but it will be fruitless and bring more misery. Mormon also comments that the Lamanites had surrounded them on every side. This highlights the miracle of Ammon and his brethren, making it to the land of Nephi without encountering the Lamanites. These Nephites cannot defeat these Lamanites on their own, but the Lord can, and he will show them. But they also need to call upon the Lord, right? He's not just going to deliver people. I mean, like he does, but because depending on what he needs to have happen. But here, it's like, okay, he can show them, but I feel like you got to ask sometimes, you want to be part of the asking part of the miracles so that you can feel like you made a difference. Hello, good morning, Finn. Okay, verse 6-12. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so verses 6-12. And it came to pass that the people began to murmur with the king because of their afflictions, and they began to be desirous to go against them to battle. And they did afflict the king sorely with their complaints. Therefore, he granted unto them that they should do according to their desires. And they gathered themselves together again and put on their armor and went forth against the Lamanites to drive them out of their land. And it came to pass that the Lamanites did beat them and drove them back and slew many of them. And now there was a great mourning and lamentation among the people of Limhi, the widow mourning for her husband, and the son and the daughter mourning for their father, and the brothers of their brethren, Now there were a great many widows in the land, and they did cry mightily from day to day, for a great fear of the Lamanites had come upon them. And it came to pass that their continual cries did stir up the remainder of the people of Limhi to anger against the Lamanites. And they went again to battle, but they were driven back again, suffering much loss. Oh, excuse me. And they went again, even the third time, and suffered in the like manner. And those that were not slain returned again to the city of Nephi. Okay. So, sorry, I'm just getting messages here. The recap or the commentary here: Limhi's people desperately wanted deliverance, and they went to battle against the Lamanites 3 different times, trying to drive them out of their land. So they weren't even trying to. It seems like they weren't even trying to get them to they weren't trying to leave the land. They were just trying to get them to not harass them, right? Because they were already giving the Lamanites, like all this, all the taxes. So you're just like, why are they bothering us, right? And so, I mean, it kind of makes sense. But anyways, each time they lost, and each time Nephites were slain. Verse 9 helps us see the aftermath of a battle. Mormon, who was abridging these plates, understood battle, since he lived in a war-torn time and was the captain of the Nephite army. He would have related to the records he was reading from an earlier time, and he lets us get a peek into the sadness and mourning among them as husbands, fathers, and brothers were killed. Oh, that is sad. Okay, verses 13 to 15. And they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro, and burdened according to the desires of their enemies. And they did humble themselves even to the depths of humility, and they did cry mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God, that he would deliver them out of their afflictions. And now, I like this thing. And now the Lord was slow to hear their cry because of their iniquities. Nevertheless, the Lord did hear their cries and began to soften the hearts of the Lamanites, that they began to ease their burdens. Yet the Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. Okay. So the Nephites were broken, and they finally turned to the Lord for the first time since King Noah had led them astray. They finally realized they cannot save themselves, so they did cry mightily to God, yea, even all the day long. And the Lord answered according to his timing and in his way. So I think it's interesting that when everything is going good, or when we think we're being awesome, everything, we don't really pray as much, and we don't really try hard to keep our connection with Christ. And it is a little bit sad, because you don't want to wait until you have to be humbled to come to Christ, right? I do remember how much I relied on prayer and things after D-Day, and it was like a constant thing that I was praying all the time. And I can definitely say that I don't pray that earnestly anymore. I think of my Savior all the time, and so that's good, but I don't necessarily think that I have that same desperation in wanting that closeness, that connection, like I did then. And I think it's okay for our what's it called, because sometimes there's seasons in our lives that change, right? And so I think it's different. Like when you're in the warmth of summer, you're not even thinking of winter, although you are dreading it, I'll be honest. But it's like summer, so you're just so excited, and you don't have to pray for warmth, and you don't have to pray for sunshine, and you feel like it's just like the weather is good, right? But then when the season changes, you appreciate that weather, that sunshine so much more, that summertime, and you look forward to that time when that time will come again. And it's not so much that you're like waiting for the next best thing or something, because there is that kind of attitude that you could have, but it's just like we want to show gratitude for the season that we're in, but also we can acknowledge that there are seasons in our lives, and that's okay. And um, it's not always going to be sunshine and running through the sprinklers time, right? Sometimes it's going to be you got to bundle up and go outside and endure that blizzard, because you want to get stuff done. And um, it changes, right? I think for me, like things, trials and things get easier if I know when they're going to end. Like, and sometimes and it seems like they didn't know when that was going to end, and so they couldn't look forward to that changing, right? And so when you feel trapped in something and you don't feel like you're in control, then you have that desperation and you get that feeling of like, I need to reach out, I need help, I need somebody. And that is when we turn to the Lord, and that's what he's waiting for us to do, to turn to him every day. But he wishes that it wouldn't just be when things get hard. He wants us to reach out to him all the time. And oh no, I just realized. Okay, so I was reading something and I don't know if you heard it. But since this scripture reading is mostly for me, I'm going to keep going as if you did hear it, because I do not want to reread again. So I apologize for saying a bunch of things and maybe you didn't hear. Okay. So I will reread verse 16, okay, fine. I'll reread 13 to 15. It says, and they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro and burdened according to the desires of their enemies. And they did humble themselves even in the depths of humility, and they did cry mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God that he would deliver them out of their afflictions. And now the Lord was slow to hear their cry because of their iniquities. Nevertheless, the Lord did hear their cries and began to soften the hearts of the Lamanites, that they began to ease their burdens. Yet the Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. Okay, so this is, the Nephites were broken and they finally turned to the Lord for their first time. Since King Noah had led them astray, they finally realized they cannot save themselves, so they did cry mightily to God, yea, even all the day long, and the Lord answered according to his timing and in his way. So that's what happens when we do not, when we finally can't do it anymore on our own. We submit our will to God. And why does it take all that humbling? I don't know. Because we think we can do all the things by ourselves. It's like a teenager. I know, Mom, right? Don't tell me, Mom, I know. And so because we know, no, then we suffer. And then by the time that they're done, it's like now they're going to ask for help because they need us and we need the Lord. And so they finally came. It's kind of like that reaching your rock bottom thing that they always say. You finally reach out to the Lord. And just quick, like I was just saying, maybe you heard, maybe you didn't, but after D-Day, I remember so much was me being in a bunch of prayer. Hello. I was praying so much, and it's a different relationship that I have that established it then, but now I have a different one because I'm not like crying to him every day, but I am praying still. Okay, hold on. Okay, in verse 16 it says, and it came to pass that they began to prosper by degrees in the land and began to raise grain more abundantly and flocks and herds, that they did not suffer with hunger. So that's good, because suffering is one thing, but suffering and being hungry, that's the worst. In fact, I remember when I was Relief Society president, something that I was learning was that people are not open to, it's just like a natural thing that people are not open to change if they're starving. Does that make sense? So like, I would fill out a bunch of food orders and things like that to help get food to those families who were in need, because they were hungry. And so we had to get them fed before you can try and do anything. If you're just hungry or hangry, you're not, I don't know if I want to say that you're not receptive to the Spirit, because obviously we fast, and so we are trying to become more in tune with the Lord as we limit our body's natural desires and inclinations and poor eating habits, right? But it was just like people didn't even want to, like, you just couldn't get anyone to focus on even thinking about coming to church or thinking about their testimony or anything, because they were hungry. So they were just suffering anyway. So that's something that I learned. So you got to feed these peeps, and which is another reason why we always do with like teenagers. You're always feeding them at activities and things, because they're going to be more excited to be there, and they're going to be able to retain information. Also, there's like fun fact: if you are learning or if you are being taught something while you're eating, the chances of you retaining that information increases, because now you have something that's tying it back. Anyway, it's kind of random, but I think that's the whole reason why we do the whole treats thing at church. It's not because we're trying to give sugar to a bunch of kids, but it's just to kind of help them retain that information. Okay, somebody is at the door. Okay, that was crazy. I just ran into the 10-year-old. Slam! It was like a movie. All right. So it says in verse 16, they were blessed, so they began to prosper by degrees. Certainly they desired full deliverance from the bondage they were experiencing, but before that came the Lord blessed them, but before that came, the Lord blessed them to be able to handle the burdens and the bondage. They still had to pay a tribute, but they raised their food more abundantly, and they were not hungry. They were strengthened. They were strengthened. Their circumstances were not yet changed, but they were strengthened to deal with their circumstances. See David A. Bednar's BYU Idaho devotional, In the Strength of the Lord, October 23, 2001. Ooh, anything from Elder Bednar is the best. Okay, so verses 17 to 22. And now there was a great number of women, more than there was of men, because remember, all the men had died and were being killed and stuff because of the wars, the attacks that the Lamanites were bringing upon them. So now there was a great number of women, more than there was men. Therefore King Limhi commanded that every man should impart to support of the widows and their children, that they might not perish with hunger. And this they did because of the greatness of their number, that they had been slain. Now the people of Limhi kept together in a body as much as it was possible, and secured their grain and their flocks. Okay, so they tried to stay close. I guess where we used to live, the houses were almost like on top of each other. So it was kind of like that. You had to kind of stay close to each other. And the king himself did not trust his person without the walls of the city, unless he took his guards with him, fearing that they might by some means fall into the hands of the Lamanites. And he caused that his people should watch the land round about, that by some means they might take those priests that fled into the wilderness, who had stolen the daughters of the Lamanites, and that had caused such a great destruction to come upon them. Ooh, right? So they're watching. For they were desirous to take them, that they might punish them. For they had come into the land of Nephi by night, and carried off their grain and many of their precious things. Therefore they laid wait for them. And it came to pass that there was no more disturbance between the Lamanites and the people of Limhi, even until the time that Ammon and his brethren came into the land. Okay, so here we learn some more details that give us an understanding of the conditions these Nephites were facing. There were more women than men because of the number of men who had died in the battles. Remember that? Okay. And then the surviving men needed to help support the widows and their children. I wonder how old these surviving men were. There couldn't have been old men, right? Because they for sure would have died. And they couldn't have been super young, because those guys probably would have died too. So, because they were so new at fighting. So maybe it was just like Like I'm trying to figure out which age group, but who knows? They needed to do that. Okay, so then the surviving men needed to help support the widows and their children. They kept together for security reasons, safety, and numbers. They secured their crops and animals. The king took guards with him whenever he was outside the city walls. The priests had come into their land during the night and carried off their grain and other precious things. So remember those priests of Noah? They knew it was them. That's crazy. And then there was some peace with the Lamanites. Okay, so verses 23 to 27. And the king, having been without the gates of the city with his guard, discovered Ammon and his brethren, and supposing them to be priests of Noah, therefore he caused that they should be taken and bound and cast into prison. And they had been the priests of Noah, and had they been the priests of Noah, he would have caused that they should be put to death. Amen. Thank you. That's what I wanted this whole time. Because that's what it is. But when he found that they were not, but that they were his brethren and had come from the land of Zarahemla, he was filled with exceedingly great joy. Now King Limhi had sent previous to the coming of Ammon a small number of men in search for the land of Zarahemla, but they could not find it, and they were lost in the wilderness. Nevertheless, they did find a land which had been peopled, yea, a land which was covered with dry bones, yea, a land which had been peopled and which had been destroyed. And they, having supposed it to be the land of Zarahemla, returned to the land of Nephi, having arrived in the borders of the land not many days before the coming of Ammon. And they brought a record with them, even a record of the people whose bones they had found, and it was engraven on the plates of ore. Okay, hold on. I think I started my walk, and somehow it is not recording on my watch. Yeah? What? Faust is chasing you, and he's trying to shoot you. Tell him to be careful, please. Okay, Faust, be careful. Okay, so the recap here from Reddit Hostess. It is at this point that Ammon and his brethren arrive. We get some repetition in this part of this chapter from Mosiah 7 and 8, but now we have context. It means a lot more. In Mosiah 7 and 8, Ammon found the Nephites in the wilderness who were happy to see them because they had been in bondage. But now here in Mosiah 21, we see that this was a people desperate for deliverance, a people who had rejected God and been brought to the depths of humility and have returned to him, a people who have lost many of their own to death or separation, a people who were forced to produce food and animals for a tribute to the Lamanites while also caring for the families of men who died in battle, a people who were being robbed by the very men they once saw as their spiritual leaders, a people who had tried and tried and tried again to find their own way to deliverance, but deliverance came through the Lord, and it began with 16 strong men who found their way to the land of Nephi. Okay, so what do you think it means to prosper by degrees? And have you ever experienced this? I feel like that's the only way to prosper is by degrees. Like, if you can prosper faster than by degrees, then good for you. Like, that's amazing. Tell me what you're doing, But I feel like it's always by degrees. It's always going to be line upon line, incremental. But sometimes it can feel like we're prospering a little faster than we were in other seasons of our lives. And I definitely can think that, like, if I bring the Lord into those things that I want to prosper, then I prosper faster. Like, seek ye first the kingdom of God, of course, and all these things shall be added unto you. And so that's what we try and do. And then things become easier as we put him first. Another question she asks is, what do you think it was like for these Nephites when Ammon and the other strong men arrived? Oh man, well, at first I would have thought it was the priests too. So I would have been upset, but then I probably would have been so excited that they were coming to save us, even though that was not their primary purpose, right? Their whole job. But they did say that they were strong, and that's why they came, or that they were sent. Hold on. Okay, so verse 28, and now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God, whereby he could interpret such engravings. Yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. Yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow because so many of their brethren had been slain, and also that King Noah and his priests had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God. And they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure of Alma and the people that went with him, who had formed the church of God through the strength and power of God and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. Yea, they did mourn for their departure, for they knew not whither they had fled. Now they would have gladly joined with them, for they themselves had entered into a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments. And now, since the coming of Ammon, oh yeah, I forgot that the people of Alma that got baptized in the waters of Mormon, all them, like 450 peeps, left. But now it's like they're all on the same page, kind of. So they didn't have to leave. They could come back. It says, yea, they did mourn for their departure, for they knew not whither they had fled. Okay, verse 32. And now, since the coming of Ammon, King Limhi had also entered into a covenant with God, and also many of his people, to serve him and keep his commandments. And it came to pass that King Limhi and many of his people were desirous to be baptized, but there was none in the land that had authority from God, because they drove Alma out, right? And Ammon declined doing this thing, considering himself an unworthy servant. Okay, that is a little bit weird that Ammon wouldn't want to do that, but okay. Therefore, they did not at that time form themselves into a church, waiting upon the Spirit of the Lord. Now they were desirous to become even as Alma and his brethren who had fled into the wilderness. Oh, that is too bad he's not around now, right? They were desirous to be baptized as a witness and a testimony that they were willing to serve God with all their hearts. Nevertheless, they did prolong the time, and on account of their baptism shall be given hereafter. And now, at the study of Ammon and his people, and King Limhi and his people, was to deliver themselves out of the hands of the Lamanites and from bondage. Okay. So, I never knew that about the people of Limhi, that they wanted to get baptized and now they couldn't because of the fact that they drove Alma away, right? So that's pretty wild. Okay, so then here's this is the commentary. It says, there are many emotions written about here. In verses 24 and 28, King Limhi experienced great joy because these men represented hope for his people. But in verse 29 to 31, Ammon and his brethren felt sorrow and mourned as they learned about the Nephites who had been slain in battle, about Abinadi who had been killed by the wicked Nephite king, and about Alma and the other righteous Nephites who had departed. These were real people with real stories. Here we learn that since the coming of Ammon, King Limhi had also entered into a covenant with God, and also many of his people. So after Ammon taught them about what King Benjamin had taught in his sermon, Mormon recorded this story in Mosiah 8. The people wanted to covenant with God. So this expedition that Ammon and his brethren were on was a rescue mission and a missionary journey. Elder Suarez taught, the faith of King Limhi's people was so profoundly affected by the words of Ammon that they made a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments, regardless of their difficult circumstances, end quote. That's in April 2017 General Conference. It's true, during our difficulties is where we learn and grow the most. And and things don't happen to us. I love this quote. Things don't happen to us, they happen for us, right? If we can use every opportunity, even the hardships, as learning experiences, if we can use those as learning experiences, it will transform who we are and the way that we do things. And that's what's key, In verse 34, it says, now they were desirous to become even as Alma and his brethren who had fled into the wilderness. Imagine how Alma and his people would feel if they had known this was happening among their old family and friends. Miracles can come in very unexpected ways. Oh, I love that. Okay, so what are some life principles and life lessons you have learned from this chapter? And I'm going to read to you the Read It, Live It, because we haven't read some in a while. So here it is. And this one says, sometimes the Lord doesn't answer. This is from verse 16. Sometimes the Lord doesn't answer our prayers overnight, but that doesn't mean the Lord has forgotten us. He will eventually prosper us. Sometimes he prospers by degrees. Wait on the Lord. Oh, waiting on the Lord is such a holy and sacred space. So if that is where you are now, I pray for you. But continue to rely on the Lord, because he's the only one that can help us through that waiting that is so necessary to help transform who we are to the person that we're about to become. And with that, I say, stay strong, warrior, and we'll pick this up tomorrow with Mosiah chapter 22. Actually, we're going to just keep going, but you know what I mean. We're going to end it now. And then, so it's not tomorrow, but it's today.